If ever there was a case that demonstrates the twin evils of drug peddling and carrying knives, particularly young people carrying knives, this is it.
So at this time, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder, okay? Because you're alleged to be involved in the murder of Sacad Ali, okay?
No. Sacad Ali was 24 years old when he was fatally stabbed at Sheffield Park. It's quite a central park. It's used by a lot of people, so it was quite shocking at the time. And it was in the early hours of a Saturday morning in March 2024. What we later found out is that Mr. Ali was lured there by Rebecca Moore, who was at that time a sex worker, and she was also connected to the Frank drugs line, which was in operation in the upper area of Sheffield. She, at that time, was also addicted to Class A drugs, so she was aligned to the drugs line through that. She lured Mr. Ali there under the promise of sexual favours, and after he met her at the agreed points at the park, there's two boys that she was working with, Barney Griffin and Jack Douglas. They're both teenage boys at that time, and they're still teenagers now, in fact. They were also involved with the Frank drug line. They were dealing through it, and so yeah, they waited in the shadows. Mr. Ali was talking to Rebecca Moore about what they had agreed upon with the sexual favours, and the two boys jumped out and they stabbed him repeatedly. Unfortunately, one of the wounds on his thigh proved to be fatal when it severed an artery. And so what we found out at the Sheffield Crime Court hearings that followed, because all three were eventually convicted of murder, was that the reason for luring Mr. Ali out to the park was the defendant's belief that he was operating a rival drug operation in the area, and so they hatched a plan to try and get their revenge on him. Jack Douglas, who was 17 at the time of his sentencing, and Barney Griffin, who was just 18. So they were both under the age of 18 when they carried this out, so they're both juveniles. So they actually sort of owned up to their wrongdoing pretty quickly on and both pleaded guilty to murder. But Rebecca Moore pleaded not guilty, and so she had a trial. And the prosecution case against her was that murder was on a joint enterprise basis. That meant that even though Moore did not actually stab Mr. Ali, because she was part of this plan that had been hatched by all three of them to lure him out to the park, then as the prosecution saw it, she was also guilty of murder. During the course of Moore's evidence, she revealed that she'd had quite a sad start to life. She'd endured abusive relationships. She didn't really have the family support that most people are able to rely on. And as her life went on, as a very young woman, she became addicted to alcohol and then drugs. And then eventually, as she attempted to fund her drug habit, she eventually became involved in prostitution. And yeah, she got drawn to this murky world of drug dealing as well as a result. Two boys, I think, had an adolescence that most parents, would expect, would recognize. It was one of, they were two childhood friends. They've been friends for most of their life, from what I could tell from court. Both boys were described as promising young footballers. And, that was sort of how their adolescence began. And it was, quite normal by all accounts. But it was when the two boys became exploited by gangs that their life really was set onto this different trajectory, which unfortunately has resulted in murder. And, in addition to ending the life of Mr. Ali, they've also unfortunately ruined both of their lives.
Seeing somebody stabbed to death at such a young age, it didn't register. And the reason why is my upbringing. I was brought up around sort of violence and stuff. So when it happened, it didn't really sink in. It was just sort of part of the part of the life that people chose to live, I suppose. Obviously, I was involved in stuff that I shouldn't have been involved in, so that could have easily been me. It could have easily been me doing it. We do have a problem in Sheffield with it, a very, very big problem that slowly but surely people are getting involved. And I think now more than ever, people are seeing that knife crime is a problem.
During the mitigation for Jack Douglas, he's the one that was 18 at the time of his sentencing. And his barrister, Richard Stein, King's Counsel, revealed that he had been identified as a victim of criminal exploitation. The police had intel which led them to that finding. Barney Griffin, on the other hand, he was described as somebody who had almost been sort of seduced by the criminal lifestyle. He considered it to be quite a glamorous enterprise, was the phrasing that was used. So I think what this case shows is that, unfortunately, this sort of exploitation can really happen to anybody. The mandatory sentence for murder is life imprisonment. Most people know that, because of the fact that Barney Griffin, who's now 18, and Jack Douglas, 17, is under the age of 21. So it's not referred to as life imprisonment, it's referred to detention at His Majesty's pleasure. But the judge explained during the course of the hearing that it essentially amounts to the same thing. So the boys, Barney Griffin was sentenced to, because he was the older of the two at the time of the killing, he was sentenced to a minimum term of 16 years. Rebecca Moore, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. And Jack Douglas also received a minimum term of 15 years. So these boys, they'll now be in prison till at least in their 30s. And it's only when a parole board deems them to be safe to the public that they could be released. The Recorder Sheffield, Judge Jeremy Richardson, King's Counsel, said,
"If ever there was a case that demonstrates the twin evils of drug peddling and carrying knives, particularly young people carrying knives, this is it. Second, this case demonstrates what can happen when young people get embroiled in drug peddling and a drug-related turf war erupts."
What always strikes me is that whenever there is a serious incident with knife crime, firstly, that it can ruin lives, whether it's fatal or just causes serious harm. You've got, because it does tend to be young people who carry knives, they often fall for this myth that you're safer but by carrying a knife for your own protection, whereas statistics always show that you are far more at risk of being a victim of knife crime yourself if you carry knives. And so it tends to be that it's young people, a few seconds of madness can ruin lives. And I think that's what these cases always show. And with murder, the case of murder, your intent doesn't have to be to kill somebody. Your intent has to be to cause them at least really serious harm. And I think what was said during this case is that was the intention. I think they wanted to scare him. And I think the fact that they went for his leg, I think they thought perhaps it would cause a serious injury, but not one that would end his life. But, unfortunately, it's just one of those cases where they hit an artery and it unfortunately had fatal consequence. I don't think anybody involved thought that would happen, but it shows just how unpredictable it can be. And it shows just how dangerous a knife really is, whether or not you think you're setting out to do, maybe set a fight, send out a message of teaching somebody a lesson. You can't control what happens next. And unfortunately, in the case of Mr. Ali, they severed an artery and he lost his life. Mr. Ali, it sounded like he was a devoted son. He loved his family, but he had this other life that they didn't know about. And after his death, the police analysed his phone and found that he had indeed been dealing with Class A and Class B drugs in Sheffield. his mother's statement was really touching, and it just sort of highlighted, the very real and lasting impacts of a crime like this. She said, "Our lives at that moment changed forever. Our family has been left completely broken hearted, and nothing can replace him." And it was quite heartbreaking, some of the details you heard about the attack itself, because his friend lived nearby, and he'd been at his friend's house when he got the call from Rebecca Moore. Um, and so his friend was kind of a partial witness to the crime and could hear Mr. Ali's shouts. And there were parts where there was one point during the attack where he said, "Okay, lads, I'm hurt now. You can stop." So he clearly understood, you know, their reason for the attack. That unfortunately they didn't stop. He was essentially, waving a white flag, wanting to, um, wanting to sort of find a way of bringing the attack to an end. Unfortunately, that didn't work, and we know what happened next.